Hello and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 21st of November 2025. Tomorrow, 22nd of November, the Battle of Ideas is taking place in Dublin. I hope to see many of you there. It's a sellout. Sarah and I will be there, so we're looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible who are able to obtain tickets. And to those of you who weren't, well, there will be future events coming up and we will see you in due course, I hope. It's been a jam-packed week in Irish politics. It started with the departure of Pascal Donohue. Simon Harris elevated himself to the position of Minister for Finance. We'll talk about all of that. There was a massive immigration reform package announced in the UK and reaction from the Irish government and politicians to that. There's going to be a by-election in Dublin Central. Enoch Burke has been sent back to prison. Ivan Yates was in the Oireachtas talking about his terrible crimes in the presidential election. The government wants to regulate this podcast, and Sarah has a story from Mayo that she's all hot under the collar about, rightly so in my view, and we'll get to that later on. First of all, how are you?
I'm good. God, it's a bumper, isn't it?
It's a bumper
Loads
week.
going on there.
It's a bumper week.
You forgot to mention as well that it's bumper week and that we've had a request, haven't we, from somebody who shall remain nameless for now.
You've had a request, although I am convinced that the government minister who said that he wanted to come as a guest on this podcast, which we will facilitate, I'm concerned this might be related to the government's plans to regulate podcasts, Sarah.
Or it might be related to the government's realisation that spoiled votes and the middle ground, centre-right opinions on things might be a good way to go politically. And they're trying to tiptoe in, dip the toe in, as they say.
We have had a request, or Sarah had a request from a member of the government asking if they could come as a guest on this podcast. And we will hope to organise that with them in the new year. So we've that to look forward to.
But also,
I
don't want to be petty or anything like that, but I'm just reminded that a couple of years somebody in Fianna Fáil actually said to me, Gript, what's that? Nobody listens to that. So now ministers are asking to come on. So suck on that.
Well, don't do that. He won't come now. If you anyway, you know who you are, and we'd love to have you on. All right. What did you make of Pascal Donohue?
Leaving or in general?
Well, both. Take it from top.
I mean, of all the ministers and of whom I have issue with, and there are many, I don't have that many issues with Pascal. Obviously, he made decisions financially in how he managed the state's monies that I would have done differently at times. But I think as I was saying to you on the phone the other day, I was reminded of a line from House of Cards when he says, competence is such a rare bird. I celebrate it when I see it. So I don't think he was a bad minister. I think that his capability will be difficult to replace, and I'm aware, as I say, that he has been replaced, and I don't think his capability has been replaced. Is that a nice way of saying that?
We'll come to that in a minute. I do have stuff to say about that, but like for me, Pascal Donohue. First of all, I know people shoot me when I say this. You know, one of those people who on screen is exactly the same as he is in person. Tremendously nice fellow. All the political skills, always remembers everyone's name, very warm, very friendly, very intelligent, and a great communicator. I mean, literally a great communicator. He'd be the one minister now who, if I saw him on the opposite side of me in a debate, I'd say, God, I've got to prep for this one. He's sharp and he's smart, and you can see that he's got the skills to go and do that job. But that said, before everyone switches off, I think his record as Minister for Finance will be one where the bad decisions he made won't become apparent for some time. I mean, I pointed out on this show before that Ireland, the country, has doubled its spending since 2015. Pascal Donohue was Minister for Finance for most of that. He persistently, in recent years, discarded. He will say he had good reason for doing it, but he persistently discarded the advice of his own Fiscal Advisory Council, which told him to rein in spending and keep it tighter. Should be said, the public are always in favour of more spending, so he just decided to go with that. He was saying during the week that he was under constant pressure from ministers to spend even more. And I think look, something happened to me actually today that made me think there's a recession on the way. Do you know what it was? I rang up my boss, my main employer, Mrs. McGurk, told me that I had to get the dog groomed before Christmas. Now, we're not big dog grooming people here, Sarah, but we get the dog groomed about twice a year, maybe once at the start of summer to get the coat trimmed, and then maybe once for Christmas. And so I was told to ring up and make the dog grooming appointment. I rang up a very well-known dog grooming place in Limerick, and I was told that there are no appointments for dog grooming until the third week in January. I was thinking to myself, if we now live in a country where dog groomers are booked out to the third week of January, that is a sign of economic overheating, and I think there might be a recession on the way. And if there is, the government is in a very bad place to meet it. And I think Paschal Donohue will ultimately have to bear the responsibility for that if it all goes tits up, which it probably will.
And another observation I'd just like to make, and I'm aware that this isn't enforceable or probably legal, but I do think that I'm not a big fan of people leaving for other jobs midterm. And I listened to him being interviewed by Pat Kenny earlier on, and he said there was no mention or no plan for this job until fairly recently, whatever. And look, we can only take him at his word on that. But I do think that you sign up for a programme for government, you are the Minister for Finance. I think you've made a commitment there, and I think it's poor form to leave. I thought it was poor form to leave when Owen Murphy left. I thought it was poor form to leave when Mary Robinson left in the middle of it. Like you run for these jobs, you run for election. People vote for you under the understanding that you're staying. Obviously, people get sick and things happen, but just going for another job, I don't know.
And look, I don't blame him on that at all. I don't. I mean, you've got to look at this in a global context. The World Bank is a global institution with an enormous budget and enormous policy influence right across the world. Pascal is somebody who, for better or worse, he has what you'd call a global conscience. He's very interested in third world poverty and all that sort of stuff. He probably feels, I think, in a justified way, that if he goes to run the World Bank, he'll be able to do more good for his point of view in the world than being the finance minister of Ireland, which, while an important position, and I'm not denigrated in any way, shape or form, there are US states with bigger budgets than the Irish government has. In fact, there are a lot of US states with bigger budgets than the Irish government has. So I think for him, it is a matter of this is an opportunity that's too good to turn down. And I have to be honest, like it will never be me, but were it me in that position offered that job, I think I would find it very hard to turn down.
But I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the reach or the size of the job. I'm saying, and he didn't get elected as Minister for Finance. He got elected as a TD for Dublin Central, as a representative of the voters of Dublin Central. And so, I mean, I take your point that it's a bigger job, and that's wonderful for him. I agree that I'm sure he sees it that he can have more influence. But I'm not sure that this kind of midterm leaving the job for a better job thing should be encouraged. That's all I'm saying.
No, it shouldn't. But the other point here is that he's the one member of the government who you could ever see having gotten a job like that. Like that is the thing. I mean, funny thing about Pascal Donohue, somebody recently described him to me, I think accurately, as the only Irish finance minister who's ever read the works of Friedrich Hayek. Like he was somebody who was a thinker, and unfortunately he doesn't seem to have internalized in any way, shape or form the works of Friedrich Hayek. But he's somebody who, is an intelligent guy and a thinker, and ran the finance department very well and kept the coalition together. And I think it's worthwhile saying that while I think his record in terms of holding the purse strings is very, very poor, the government is going to miss him as a communicator and is going to miss him as a political fixer. And we've now got the extraordinary vista of Simon Harris at the age of 38, having held in his career the ministries for justice, health, higher education, the office of Taoiseach and Taoiseach, will now complete the set and become Minister for Finance. And before I give you my thoughts on that, I'd like to hear yours.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that I'm anticipating that our view on this is going to be quite similar, in the sense that we have discussed before on this podcast that he doesn't have any experience. And before he went into politics, his CV wouldn't have qualified him to run a local centre. So that's a worry. I also think the minister for certain ministries are more important than others. Let's call a spade, and finance is about as important as it gets. So experience it's probably the minister. I personally think that the Minister for Finance job is more important, and your ability for it is more important than the office of the Taoiseach. And so I think that Simon Harris putting himself in there is extremely arrogant, extremely silly, speaks to me like he doesn't want to give the promotion to somebody in case they make a leadership challenge of him in the future. And I think he's wholly unqualified for it, and it's a bit of a concern.
I think it's a catastrophic political error on his part. So there's a couple of things here. The first thing is that, as you say, Minister for Finance is a huge job. It's an all-consuming job. It's the most important job in the government. And Simon Harris can't give it cannot give that job his full attention. He can't give it his full attention because he's also the Taoiseach. He's the deputy leader of the government. He's the leader of Fine Gael in government. He's leader of one of the largest coalition parties. He is going to have to be across all the other departments. He's got to prepare to become Taoiseach in 2 years when he becomes Taoiseach. He's got to manage all the Fine Gael ministers. He's got to manage the relationship with Micheál Martin. He cannot focus on just being Minister for Finance. There's a reason, Sarah, that he is the first person in Irish political history to be the leader of a party in a coalition government and the Minister for Finance. It has never happened before. I was looking at this during the week. There are examples. I mean, when Dick Spring was the leader of the Labour Party in the coalition governments in the mid-1990s, Rory Quinn was the Minister for Finance. The Taoiseach never takes that job because it's just too big. There's so much on your plate if you're Taoiseach and running all the relationships across government that now he's taken on the Minister for Finance as well. So that's the first thing. He's taken on an enormous job of work, and Simon Harris is not somebody who is renowned in the government departments he's been in for a work ethic. That's the first thing. The second thing is that he is, as you say, entirely unqualified. Pascal Donohue had a background in finance. He worked for banks and what have you before he became Minister for Finance. There are other people in the Fine Gael party who are kind of moderately qualified. I'm thinking of people like Peter Burke, the Minister for Enterprise, very talented guy, very good communicator. Would have, I think, been the obvious pick for that job. But as you say, Simon Harris has decided to give it to himself for whatever reason. And the third reason it's an enormous political mistake is that he now owns the economy. Simon Harris now owns every government department that Fine Gael are in. He is responsible for health. He is responsible for, what all do they have? I don't even remember all the departments they have. Education. He's now responsible for finance. And if I am correct, and the thing is, when you talk about there being a recession, you'll always be correct eventually. There will always be a recession. He now owns the economy. And he's done it in such a way that he's taken over from somebody in Pascal Donohue who was believed to be, whether he was or he wasn't, a capable finance minister. So if there's a downturn, the narrative and the story will be, it was all going well till Simon fucked it. That will be the narrative. So he has put himself in a position where there's no one else to blame. He's the person responsible for it all. He's got so much on his plate that I don't think he can even do the job effectively. And yeah, good luck to him. Good luck to him. I mean, I don't wish ill on the man, but like, it doesn't inspire confidence.
You shouldn't, because the people who are going to suffer if he makes a complete balls, the whole thing is us. As in, people of Ireland. Like, it's too serious.
It's an incredible decision. And it smacks, as you say, of arrogance and desperation and panic to just say you'll take the job on yourself. And I really think that it surprises me that there wasn't anyone to say to him, and indeed to the government, look, Paschal is resigning. You don't need a finance minister for the next week. The budget is over. Have a good long sit down and think about this. And it smacked me of a rush job. Get out there and get the reshuffle done straight away. I think they could have taken a week and had a proper think about it, because now they've got a position where the leader of Fine Gael is the Minister of Finance, is the Taoiseach, is the Taoiseach in waiting. Means, by the way, there's going to have to be another person shuffled into that job in 2 years when Simon Harris is, as he presumably is on track to be, elevated once more to the office of Taoiseach. So yeah, it's great. And the final thing about him, by the way, is Simon Harris's communication style does not suit the job of Minister for Finance. This is a guy who communicates in TikToks and in short sound bites, has a habit of being glib. You cannot be glib when the international finance markets are watching for your every utterance. And I reckon there's a 20% chance at some point over the next year he'll say something remarkably stupid that sets off some market tremors. I won't say a disaster, but market tremors.
God, I think you're being very unfair. I think you're being very fair, actually. I mean, saying that it'll take a year. I'd give it about a month. Look, it's a silly move. It's not politically smart. As you say, it smacks of panic. And sometimes part of leadership is being able to recognize, or being a good leadership is being able to recognize your own shortcomings or where your weaknesses are. And I think what he's demonstrated is that he hasn't got that ability.
Well, the good news is Simon Harris is now in charge of the nation's economy, and the nation's top diplomat is now Helen McEntee, who is responsible for the entire broad swathe of Irish diplomacy in a changing and challenging world. What do you make of that appointment?
I'm actually for this. I think this is the best part of the news, because I'd rather that lady be travelling around the world meeting dignitaries than be in charge of educating young people in Ireland, given some of the views that she has on children, transgenderism and all that jazz. So I'm pretty happy that she's gone from education. I think that her being in charge of what my kids may or may not be learning in school and at what age was a deep concern to me.
She said something funny in her first day in the job. She came in and she said that the first thing she'd do would be she'd go in, she'd sit down her officials, she'd give them all the 1,000-yard stare, and she'd say, "What is the progress of the Occupied Territories Bill and why is it on my desk?" And I just thought that was hilarious, because, I mean, she could have just picked up the phone and said, "Simon Harris, you just appointed me to the job. You just left that department. What is the position with the Occupied Territories Bill?" And it seemed to imply, of course, the press didn't pick up on this, because the press are all in favour of the Occupied Territories Bill, and also all in favour of Helen McEntee. That she was basically implying Simon Harris had let the matter, he just wasn't doing his job. He hadn't been pushing his officials to the pin of their collar to get this done. So it's kind of a sideswipe at her own party leader, one which she presumably didn't intend. But it just says a lot about this one. Do you know, you said I was too nice with Simon Harris. I'm going to say something about Helen McEntee. Helen McEntee was a man, she wouldn't be in the cabinet. It is the most open secret in Irish politics, in government, in opposition, in journalism, that Helen McEntee is incompetent. Helen McEntee is a bad minister. Helen McEntee has a terrible record in every department she goes to. And if she was a man, she would be out of her job. The reason she's still in her job is because the Irish media would go balubas if the most prominent female in the cabinet was sacked for incompetence. She is there because she is a woman, and it's very important to have a woman, and because she's a young, middle-class woman, that's why she's in the job. It is not because she hasn't accomplished anything in any department she's been in.
No,
good luck to us. You disagree?
She walked down the street that time with the guards to prove that the streets were safe. That was a big deal.
Was. But do you disagree with me on a serious note, or do you think?
I don't disagree with you at all. But I don't want to be traitorous to anybody. But I don't think she's the only woman who has a cabinet position who's not competent. And no, you're not going to draw me on who, but there's a couple of women who are there because they're women. Come at me in the comments if you want, but I wish it wasn't true, but it isn't. It is true.
Well, for the sake of balance, we should note that there are no shortage of incompetent males, not only in the government but across the Oireachtas.
We don't have to do that caveat, John, because that's not the conversation we're having. Don't fall for the trap of feeling like you have to, fluff people up just so they can hear hard information.
Yes, miss.
So, no, I don't think she's competent. I think there's another woman who springs to mind in particular, who's very, very underwhelming as a minister, who would never be there if she was a man. But look, that's the world we live in.
Look, competent people don't grow on trees. We've had competent women, in positions of authority. Mary Harney, whether you liked her or didn't like her, and I know lots of people didn't like her, but you didn't like her because she was competent. She, when she was Taoiseach Minister for Health, for example, she pushed through the single biggest reform of the health ministry that there's been in my lifetime. I don't think it was a good one, but she competently pushed it through. And there have been others. Mary Coughlan, for example, was not a particularly bad minister when she was in the government in social welfare and social affairs. There are plenty of competent women. Helen McEntee ain't amongst them. That is my view, and she's now in charge of the nation. I mean, and I'm just frightened. We've got a world that is fairly unstable. You've got all this crack with Russia and Ukraine and the drones and the boats off the coast and whatever's happening in Poland. You've got obviously the nation's obsession with making itself unpopular amongst its allies on Gaza. You've got tariffs and trade, and the person we put in charge of the country's international relations is Helen McEntee. The best we can hope for is that
But that kind of comes back to my point, John, about continuity. You know, I was listening to the radio today and they were on, I think it was News Talk, and they were talking about, you know, Metro North. And there was an architect or an engineer on, she was talking about how the large capital projects in Ireland lose momentum with the changes of government, and that really there should be, you know, we should move towards a model which is that within reason, a change in government isn't able to change or derail a project that is a 10-year project or a 2-year project or whatever. And she was making the point that some of what's gone wrong with the Children's Hospital and other things is just that change in government, change in ministers, change in this, change in that. And to go back, we're having this conversation because of Pascal leaving, and again, I understand that you can't stop people from leaving and people get sick or whatever, but it does cause chaos. I mean, we had a conversation on this podcast a couple of weeks ago where you were talking about the government's first X months in office and what they had or hadn't done. And I mean, people have been in ministries where be they foreign affairs and the occupied territories bill or education or whatever else, and then they're whipped out and it's somebody else has to start. And, you know, it's completely understandable and acceptable that somebody would go into a ministerial position, say in education, Hildegard Naughton, they need a couple of months, you know, to find their feet, to figure out their way, to figure out what kind of things they want to do with the ministry. But like, it's all just wasted time. And
We
meanwhile,
didn't have to do that though. So like, this is the thing. It's kind of like, oh, Pascal left, so there had to be a reshuffle. No, Pascal left, so there had to be a new Minister for Finance. He could have appointed somebody from outside the cabinet into that job. Could have appointed somebody like Neil Richmond, for example, straight into that job. Somebody who's
Neil Richmond is a junior minister.
Yeah. So what? Hermone.
Okay.
You don't have to move people.
Yeah.
There are other people. I mean, like, also, I don't understand why it always has to be a member of Fine Gael. I mean, just appoint that young lad Albert Dolan in Fianna Fáil, who he seems to have a bit about him. Give him a go. Just appoint somebody. I mean, like, you know, you say, oh, it needs to be a serious person as Minister for Finance. So is your answer to that Simon Harris?
But it's Simon Harris' appointment. It's Simon Harris's appointment because it's a Fine Gael ministry. Plus, the criteria that Micheál needs first and foremost in people that he actually promotes is agreeableness, not competence.
That is true. That is true. All right, we've done enough on this. We've talked about it for over 20 minutes. I'm almost bored of it, but we'll be returning to the subject in the weeks to come as we watch Simon Harris's wild and wonderful adventures in the Department of Finance. What do you make of I nearly said your mate. He's not your mate. I keep doing this, but like, in fairness to say, you know his constituency very well. So I always tend to say your mate, Jim O'Callaghan, also fellow barrister, of course. He's been in charge of handling the government's response to the new UK immigration reform, which seems to be, I mean, whether the UK government will actually be able to pass those immigration reforms or not is one thing, but it seems to be very harsh stuff. I mean, it's a complete sea change there. They're going to make asylum seekers financially contribute quite severely to their own accommodation if they can afford it. They're going to massively speed up deportations. There's a whole suite of packages to deter people from coming to Britain. And of course, the obvious likely thing to happen, assuming that there's no change in the law here to match it, is that a good few people who are in Britain and fearing these consequences will find that it's very easy to get into the nearest EU member state neighbour across a wide open border, which is, of course, the Irish Republic. So Jim has, Laura Perrins called him this week Nimble Jim, because he said he's going to be nimble in how Ireland responds to all of this. Why is he saying he'd be nimble? Why isn't he just saying we'll bring our immigration laws into line with the UK's?
Well, I mean, I don't know why he does anything, but in fairness, thus far, we have seen some more progress in terms of speed and agility on immigration from him than we'd seen from any minister in the last couple of years. I admit, before I even finish the sentence, that the numbers are way too low, that the turnaround time is still way too long. I would say that Jim is testing the waters from a public relations point of view as to what kind of outrage he'll get from the media from cozying up to any element of what the UK are about to do. But the truth is that that's going to have massive implications for us. So he's going to have to. I was
going to say your praise for Jim O'Callaghan there reminded me of somebody describing a particular snail as a thoroughbred because it's won the 10-meter snail derby. You know, it's still not the
No, I think it could be going faster, for sure. It should be going faster. I mean, listen, but he's still we still live in a country where the Sinead Gibneys and the media still have a very, very um, and I was going to say anti-immigration approach to everything, and anybody who's seen to be proactive about even enforcing existing asylum laws is.
Well, I don't understand. What I actually don't understand about the government in general on this issue and on a whole range of other issues is you say things like Sinead Gibney will be annoyed at them, and they'll go on and they'll get a rough time of it on Virgin Media's Tonight Show or on prime time. Like, they should just go on and they should revel in that. They should go on and they should have whoever it is in RCA absolutely horrified that they're going to crack down on immigration, and they should go, well, I know it doesn't suit your agenda now in the media, but I'm for the people. The people love it.
I know, but
when you stand up to the media.
But that's because you've made an entire living out of being that guy. You go on the TV show and they have to get three again you, and even the presenter is against you, and you kind of like it.
I haven't been on TV in ages, actually. I don't know why, but I don't mind.
You know that expression, like, don't wrestle with a pig because you both get covered in shite and the pig likes it. You're the pig.
Somebody's clipping that. Somebody's going to clip that.
But in that scenario, like, you like the banter, you revel in it. That's not a criticism. Like, you're brave. It's good. But a lot of people on issues like immigration and a lot of the woke stuff, people are just quietly coming out, dipping their toe into seeing what's, is it safe to come out? Am I safe to say things like, there might be a bit of a problem with immigration? Like, I saw Simon Harris the other day saying something like, I was really shocked at the name calling and the abuse for just simply giving an opinion on immigration. Yeah, buddy, who made it that way? Dum-dum. I mean, this is the kind of environment that these people created.
This is a guy who
was part of a government that was actively engaged in calling people names for doing exactly that when they were protesting in the North Inner City. He knows it, you know it, I know it.
Yes,
it's just outraged that people, because obviously he's morally and intellectually superior to those people, so it's different when he says it. But
I think what he thinks he gets is he thinks he should get the benefit of the doubt, right? So he thinks he's been so liberal for his entire, senior political career, we'll say, that he should get the benefit of the doubt. So that when Simon Harris, who, was on the right side on gay marriage, was the leading light in the abortion referendum, has persistently taken a good, moderate, liberal view on basically every issue that there is. Trans rights, immigration, public spending, funding of NGOs, funding of the media, a reliable liberal. And then he thinks he's built up all this street cred that he can come out and say something kind of like mildly critical of liberals, and everyone will go, well, we know Simon Harris. We know that, we might disagree with him on this one, but he's obviously coming at it from a position of good faith. That's what he thought would happen. And what he has learned is, what all liberals learn when they step outside the fence on one issue, is that there's no. You don't get to do that. The moment you step outside the pale on one issue, you are immediately a heretic. You've immediately been corrupted by the far right. You immediately have bad motives. The way they enforce that kind of woke dogma so brutally is by doing exactly that, by making sure that there's a price to pay if you step outside it. It doesn't matter if you are the most liberal, progressive person in the history of the world. If you have one contrary opinion on one topic, look at Graham Linehan on your favourite issue, on the transgender stuff. Graham Linehan, a down-the-line doctrinaire liberal on every issue under the sun, steps out of line on one issue and he is a heretic and they're setting the cops on it. So Simon Harris thought that he'd be protected from criticism on the immigration stuff because, he's got such a good progressive record. No, that's not how it works. Works like that on this side, the viewers might forgive me for the occasional outburst of what they consider to be Trump derangement syndrome is actually common sense, because they know I'm sound on a lot of other issues. It doesn't work that way if you're progressive.
No, I saw this week Ardal O'Hanlon did a kind of a softball article about kind of, what he does with his day kind of thing. And it was just a kind of a series of questions about like, what do you have for breakfast and whatever. And there was just a little piece in it about Graham Linehan where, he said all the right things, like, oh, it's sad what happened to Graham, and the way he says it, and this kind of, and it was such like, it just made him go down so much in my estimation. This is the guy who wrote the thing that made your career, and you still have to kind of put the boot into him a little bit. And then I saw loads of lovies and everything tweeting the article, being like, this article is so funny and it's wonderful. It wasn't funny at all. He's not that funny. He had his lines written for him by Graham Linehan. He played an extremely stupid person, maybe actually not that convincingly. Maybe it wasn't that much of a stretch for him. But he does this and it's like, oh, sad what happened to Graham Linehan. Like, he says the right thing. He gets the clap on the back from everybody, and all is well with the world, because he doesn't really have any courage. And he talks in it about his 2 daughters, and they're in college and they're doing this and doing that. I just thought to myself, God, what a pathetic coward of a man.
I don't claim to know Ardal O'Hanlon. I don't know him at all, but I know or knew in a different life. I knew his family quite well. You remember his brother. Knew his father, who's kind of core of the Dáil, of course, for many years, quite well. I know his background. I know where he's from. I would bet my house on everything I know about where he's from. He does not believe that Graham Linehan is wrong on the transgender stuff. Absolutely doesn't. I mean, that's the fame of the man. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm wrong. But I bet my house he doesn't.
But most people don't.
No, they don't. But like it is but he knows the rules, which is that you can't step out of line, because Graham Linehan is the example. And Simon Harris on immigration is kind of the example as well. Doesn't matter how much service you've done to progressive causes over the years. If you step out of line once, you are anathema to them. And that is and then they talk about, culture of fear, culture of abuse. I mean, there's nobody more afraid in Ireland than the progressive who has one opinion that he's a bit worried about.
Yeah.
That's fear.
Totally.
That's fear.
But that's the thing, that like ultimately what it boils down for me is that you might, when you put your head down at night, that you're selling your soul to keep on the right side of the right people. But I'm allowed, in my personal opinion, I'm allowed to lose a massive amount of respect for you because you choose the easy road at the expense of women, at the expense of a migration situation in Ireland that's out of control, that's having negative effects on any number of areas for different people in Ireland, etc., etc., etc. Like, if you just lack the courage, that's the matter for yourself. But I still reserve the right to lose massive amounts of respect for you, because it's just an integrity thing for me, that you would choose to write to contribute to an article where you would say, oh, sad what happened to Graham Linehan, when you really know, when you put your head down on your pillow at night time, he's right, and you just don't have the balls to say it. Pardon the pun.
Well, I was going to, because you gave me a perfect hook there about people taking the easy way out, and I was going to say one person who hasn't taken the easy way out is Enoch Burke. But you know what? I'll come to that in a few minutes. Because I wanted to give it time, and I didn't want to leave it to the end of the podcast. You were telling me during the week this story about the children's hospice in Mayo, and when she was telling me the story on the phone, folks, the smoke, I could feel the smoke. It was I could nearly hear the whistle of steam coming out of her ears. You know, the kettle's boiling and you hear that whistle, like it was.
Sometimes
you were steaming.
You rile me up on purpose. No, okay. So I'm going to explain this because it wasn't that big of a news story, so a lot of people might not have heard it. So I'm actually have it here. I'm going to read. It was covered on RTE by the Western correspondent Pat McGrath. A fundraising campaign has been launched to finance the first purpose-built children's hospice outside of Dublin, costing around 14 million. The facility will be constructed in Castlebar to provide specialist care for children with life-limiting medical conditions from along the western seaboard. Now, it goes on. The minister is, excited about a collaboration between the state and the Hospice Foundation to bring the project to fruition. Now, this made me irrationally enraged, because here's the thing. We've talked to death about the scoliosis issue and what has happened to children who have scoliosis and promises that were made by Simon Harris. So, as I've said before, TII, this is Ireland, no country for sick children. But then I read this.
Dying children in this case, by the way.
Now, but that's what I said. TII, no country for children with scoliosis. And then I read this. TII, no country for dying children. How on earth does the Hospice Foundation have to fundraise for 14 million for a place for children to die? You hear this all the time, people talking about, how society treats its most vulnerable and whatever. Surely we're a failed state if there has to be a fundraising effort to build a 14 million euro place for children to die. How much was the bike shed? How much was the security thing outside Leinster House? I looked it up the other day after I was on the phone to you. Was it 9 million euro that the state paid last year out of the budget for pouches for teenagers to put their phones into? So I think we're nearly at the 14 million just on the bike shed, the security hut, and the pouches for mobile phones. Okay. Any hundreds of places 14 million could come from to cover a hospice for children to die on. But no, the Minister for Health is excited about the collaboration where they will work together to raise the 14 million, and that the Hospice Foundation can raise 14 million to build a hospice, a place for children from a part of the country that have never had a hospice before to go to die. I think that is the most depressing, rage-inducing thing I've heard in a while. It's not a big story, but like how are we so far from having the basics sorted at this point? Like, dying is part of life, and unfortunately sometimes children get sick and they die. So children, we know, have been dying and getting sick forever. So how do we how is this even necessary?
Yeah, people, most of you will get this. Some people don't. And I explain it because some people don't, because obviously 14 million euro is a life-changing sum of money to most people. If you gave me 14 million euro, I might still do this podcast for fun, but I think I'd, broadly speaking, retire, buy myself a nice little place somewhere in the south of Spain and, live a frugal and comfortable life to the end of my days. It's a lot of money. But in the context of the government's annual budget, it is the steam of their piss, basically.
Yeah.
It's nothing. It is... if it's the equivalent of, if you earn 40 grand a year, it's the equivalent of spending you a tenner. That's or less. The amount of money we're talking about is negligible, but it's an awful lot of money. If you want to try and raise that money, if you're an organization that doesn't have access to taxes, you want to go out and raise that money from people, you've got to get big corporate sponsors and all the rest of it to put that money in. And as you say, for like a place for sick children to go with their families and die. And as you say, we're told this is a compassionate society. It is actually. When you were telling me, I really couldn't believe it. The only thing I could think of to say is that perhaps the only reason this place is being built so cheaply is because they're fundraising for it. Because if the government was building it, it'd probably be 140 million, right?
Well, I mean, for all we know, the government were like, "Can we build this?" And they're like, "No, we don't have the time to wait. We don't have 12 years to wait." But it's not a big build. It's not a large capital project. It's just, if you're the Minister for Health and you go down and you're at that and you're speaking to the press afterwards, do you not feel like something's gone wrong here? Like I said, 9 million euro was spent on pouches for teenagers' mobile phones.
But the government could fund it. And I think often what happens here, and I think this is a thing that happens with Irish politicians, and I'm speculating, I don't know what happened with Jennifer Carroll McNeill on this one, so I have no inside information or anything like that. But I think often what happens is you're the minister, you go down to this event and you're like, oh, that's 14 million. My department can fund that. And you go back and you say to your general secretary, this is a great project, I'd like to fund it. And the general secretary gives you a list of 47 reasons why you can't do that. And we've Irish ministers who kind of go, oh, okay. I think there's an awful lot of that happens rather than cabinet ministers taking initiative and actually solving problems. That's what I think. Well, I don't think. I know from some of the work I've done over the years dealing with people in the Department of Education. I know it's exactly what happens, but I don't know whether it happened in this instance or not. But it's as you say, it's one of those stories where you just have to look twice a hospice for dying kids and people have to fundraise for it when the state is spending this year on health. I actually don't know off the top of my head what the figure is, but it's like 25 billion quid on the health budget this year. It's extraordinary that they can't find, 14 million of that, which is nothing. It's a fraction of a percent to fund this. Anyway, there you go. I'll tell you what, it'll cost them more than 14 million quid to regulate podcasts. So I wanted to get your opinion on that, because obviously if they do that, there'll have to be a podcast regulator, won't there? There'll have to be an office, a commission na podcasta set up to regulate the likes of you and me. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do, Sarah, when the Oireachtas committee, which has been investigating Ivan Yates, cracks down on the likes of you and me? Maybe it'll tell us we can't use bad language on the podcast. Maybe it'll tell us that somebody has to watch the podcast to prove its publication. What do you make of this nonsense?
Well, it is nonsense. Once again, we love a bit of, this seems to be a problem. It needs a solution. That's a solution. Let's do that. I mean, I think I said a couple of weeks ago, I think Ivan Yates should have said what he was doing or whatever. But I think when he went in, and I watched clips of him speaking, and in the Dáil, and I think he ran rings around them.
Of course he did.
I mean, I think he made everybody who asked him a question look a bit silly. I think that the state should, I mean, I think that there's something really funny and ironic about the idea that the state would start to regulate a podcast like this when they're doing such a good job of regulating RTE and, the fairness and unbiased dispensing of information on those other platforms. Ha, 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 ha. I mean, get the basics right before you start. But they'll never do this, because how would it even work, John?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't work. I mean, that's why I was joking about it a few minutes ago. But it's a symptom. The reason why Ivan Yates ran rings around them, and the reason why this is being proposed, is it's a symptom of McGurk's law of Irish politics. This is what people are repeating this. It's McGurk's law of Irish politics. I want credit for it, which is that the entirety of Irish politics can be explained by the fact that Irish politicians are fundamentally incapable of solving any problems. They're capable of doing two things. They're capable of banning things, and they're capable of taxing things. Those are the two things they can do. And because they can't actually solve any problem, those are there are three things they do. They tax things, they ban things, vapes will be an example there, or they invent problems to solve by banning or taxing. And so this whole business, this is another example of, podcasts aren't regulated. That's another example of inventing a problem to solve. Because they can't fix immigration, they can't fix housing, they can't fix health, they can't fix education. There ain't a damn thing they can do anything, but they can invent a problem. There are lots of podcasts out there, and some of them aren't regulated, and people could be listening to anything, and some of them are wild now. They're wild, and I don't think that should be happening. That's the bullshit. And then so it's this must be regulated. It must be regulated as if government is going to make anything better. So it's McGurk's law of politics. They can't fix any problems, so they invent problems to solve. And that's why Ivan Yates was in front of the Oireachtas committee this week. It's fucking unbelievable. The Oireachtas has no business having anything to do with this whole Ivan Yates scandal business. It didn't impact them in any way. It wasn't nothing to do with them. They literally...
They think... No. They think, on some level, that Ivan Yates is, maybe if he hadn't said smear the bejesus out of her, they're devastated that Catherine Connolly got elected, and they need to figure out how to stop that from ever happening again.
Well, do you remember in 2011? There was a referendum on Oireachtas inquiries.
Yeah.
Which I was looking back on this because I just remembered it was defeated, but in my head I thought it was well beaten, but it actually wasn't. It was very narrow. It was 53 to 47. And the referendum on Oireachtas inquiries would have empowered the Oireachtas, these bozos, who had Ivan Yates in running rings around them. They would have been able to launch an investigation into any matter of public importance, whether it was connected to taxpayers' money or anything to do with the government or not, any matter of public importance. They would have been able to investigate individuals. They would have been able to make findings of fact against individuals. And they would have been able to compel people under pain of contempt, to attend their committees and be subjected to a series of questions, and then they would sit as judge and jury on them. Can you imagine what these bozos would do had that referendum passed. Maybe, first of all, you and me'd be in there. Would have been in there multiple times over the last few years being investigated for our views on immigration, COVID vaccines, COVID lockdowns, you name it.
Said the F word a
Secondly,
few times and said some mean things about politicians, and their feelings are probably hurt. I'd definitely be arrested or subject to the investigation for saying that a woman can't have a penis.
yeah, absolutely. And look, Ivan Yates went in and he, I reiterate in case people think this is some kind of podcasters stick together thing. I really don't know Ivan at all, and neither do you, I think. But he
No.
ran rings around them. He made them look like fools.
They are fools.
They
are fools.
They're not all fools. Alan Kelly's not a fool. He's not a fool. But
This is garbage. Listen, getting Ivan Yates in and asking him questions as if it's, some kind of serious, as if you're all serious people and this is worthy of serious time. And all of the different things, as I just said, they're fundraising for a hospice for children. And this is what this is like. A good way that we used to look at it in business and in management consulting sometimes is you count up all the hours of the people in the room. How many people are in the room? How many hours does it take? And then you say, well, if it's 15 people and we're in there for 2 hours, it's 30 man hours of shite for this. When there's better things to be doing. So it is a farce. It is a charade. It should be treated with the contempt that it deserves. And what's he? There doesn't even have any teeth. Like, what's the point of it? Is the point to just bring Ivan in for his spanking?
Yeah, that's what it seemed to me to be. But of course, it's not just the politicians. The media is bad on this story.
Totally.
The media are as bad. And I'll take the media seriously on conflicts of interests when they start taking seriously the fact that up until last year, Hugh O'Connell was political reporter with the Indo, now he's Simon Harris's chief political advisor. The revolving doors between the media and politics are a much greater conflict of interest than Ivan Yates not telling us something on his podcast that he was mates with Jim Gavin or working for Jim Gavin. Jim Gavin still wouldn't have won. Like it's just.
But I think that really we're at the point now where any variation of any investigation or inquiry now, I treat with contempt, to use my phrase. You'll do nothing. So this, to bring Ivan in, is brought in for a farce where Ivan runs rings, or it's like he's mauling them and they all look a bit silly and the whole thing is a waste of everybody's time. Then we have a different kind of inquiry into what happened, internal inquiry in Fianna Fáil, which is basically Micheál just kicking it down. It's a bit like I have a fight with my husband about who didn't bring out the bin. And then he says, oh, well, we're going to have an investigation. We're going to ask the kids. We're going to meet. I'm going to make inquiries with the kids and we'll meet again in 3 weeks to see. By then, the whole oxygen has gone out of it and nobody cares anymore. And that's what Micheál's doing. So that's one type of it. So we have multiple different types of
I don't know that, sorry, just to cut across, I don't know that nobody cares, because did I see Lorraine Clifford Lee this week basically saying that she was eagerly awaiting the results of that inquiry?
Yeah, I did see that. Actually, I got a very funny text message from somebody in Fianna Fáil because she was on saying that she was asked outright by Fionn Sheehan if she thought that Micheál would be the leader in a year, and she didn't answer. She didn't give a definitive answer, and somebody sent me the clip. Somebody who shall remain nameless in Fianna Fáil, but well-known in Fianna Fáil person, sent me a clip of it and just said with the line, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child."
Well, the joke there, if people don't get it who aren't familiar with Fianna Fáil internal humour, is that Lorraine Clifford Lee has been consistently appointed to the Senate by Micheál Martin despite never having won any competitive elections at all. Yes, she owes her entire lengthy career as a senator to Micheál Martin's goodwill, but apparently she senses the tides shifting. Somebody else for whom the tides are shifting, godly. My link to Enoch earlier on was better than anyway. Enoch, back to prison. Do you have an opinion on this?
Do you know, it's one of the issues in Ireland that I would say I've had the most changeable opinion on, if that makes sense. Sometimes I think I agree with his principal point, and I admire to a point the commitment to the cause. I really do. I really, really do. But are you going to go to jail forever? And I know there's people, and there'll be people in the comments who'll say that's what a martyr is, and that's what he'll do, and he should do, and he's right, and whatever. And I think he is right on the point that he should not be mandated by the school to use gender pronouns or whatever
But
pronoun.
that's not his issue.
But
Look,
that was the original issue, John. But
no, but it's not. That issue has never been litigated in court. Not
no,
once.
I understand that. But where we're at now is a contempt of court issue, and you cannot just continue to do this and expect. I mean, I'd love to just ask him, like, what do you want? What do you expect the judge is going to do? Say, all right, we'll just leave it. So it's just every time we think we're at an impasse, we're not at an impasse. We're just at another impasse.
I'm starting to really object. I have actually an article out today, Friday. If you're listening to this on Friday, it's on the website. You have to be a subscriber to read it, but it's on the website about this. Where I really do take issue with this constant describing of Enoch Burke as brave, because I don't see that. I see two things. I see a sort of certain self-destructiveness, and I see a certain dishonesty. I was in that article. I made the point.
There's a commitment there to a religious principle.
There may be a commitment to a religious principle, but in terms of bravery, I think it is brave to go to prison for what you believe. So I have repeatedly said, and I will repeat it for the record, I do not pay my TV license. I will not pay my TV license. I pay a Sky subscription. I pay a TNT Sports subscription. I pay various Netflix, Disney Plus. I pay for all the TV that I watch. I don't watch RTE. I do not pay for it. I will not pay for it. And I will go to prison sooner than pay for it. And if the cops should knock on my door tomorrow and say, we have filed charges against you for refusal to pay your TV license, and you're due in court in Nina or Limerick or wherever it is at the end of the week, and you will be committed to prison if you don't pay, I will go to the court and I'll tell the judge, I'm not paying. You can send me to prison, or you can find some other remedy. And if I go to prison, here's the thing. This is the important thing. If I go to prison for not paying my TV license, I will legitimately be in prison because I have broken the law and not paid my TV license. And I will not come on this podcast or phone into the podcast from prison or send you a text on some listed mobile phone and say, Sarah, they've locked me up because they're persecuting conservatives and because actually it's, my views on something. No, I'll be in prison because of what I actually did. Enoch Burke is not in prison because he wouldn't engage in the transgender pronoun. He is in prison because he has persistently and consistently and repeatedly flouted and shown contempt to the courts. He's refused to accept court orders. When the court has made orders against him, he has said, I'm not abiding by them. Now, I think in society, there needs to be a penalty for that. If we had a situation where people didn't obey court orders, imagine a situation where a judge said to a man who was, alleged to be abusive to his wife, that the court is now putting a barring order on you. You cannot go near her house. And imagine he said, I just don't recognize the authority of the court. I love her. I'm married to her. I'm going home and I'm sleeping in her bed. What should the state do? Should the state say,
well, he's breaching
you're free to go about your
and he does go to jail. That's the way
exactly.
that works.
He will be in contempt of court and breaching that order. Imagine a situation where, you've got squatters in a house. And the court says it's not your house. You don't live there. You've occupied this person's property. You've got to leave. And the squatters just said, no, we're not leaving. It's our house now. You would want the state to enforce it. Enoch Burke is if he was to get away with what he's getting away with, it would damage all of us far more than the pronoun thing in the school. And yeah, I think he absolutely should be in prison until this nonsense ends.
Hold on. I mean, what you're describing there are things like barring orders, whatever, and even the TV license, and their established laws. The genesis of this was his being fired from his job for refusing to use the incorrect pronoun for a child that he was teaching. That's not a law, so it isn't. You're not comparing like with like, for starters. I take your point. I take your point that because what you're describing are barring orders and because I can see you making a face there. You're describing barring orders, breach of barring orders. You're just describing not paying your TV license. These are laws. The original point of this, I agree with him. He should not be told, he should not lose his job or be suspended from his job for refusing to use the incorrect pronouns for a child. And I think that in the beginning, he would have gotten a lot of support for that. The problem is the subsequent, and even the first couple of times when he went to court or whatever, I did think some of that was brave. But I think now we're at a point where he's losing or has lost the room.
I don't think it's about the room. I don't. I mean, look, first of all, can I just say for the record? I mean, people, I shouldn't have to say this for the record, but I will. Because some people have very short memories and they get very annoyed in the comments. I agree with Enoch Burke on the principle of pronouns. I don't have a direct superior. No, I don't have a direct superior in work, but for the argument's sake that I had a direct superior who told me that I had to use a pronoun that I fundamentally disagreed with, I would regard that as breaching my human rights, and I would refuse to do it. And were I sacked on foot of that, I would take a case to court. I'd probably hire lawyers. I'd probably have them conduct the case in a particular way, and I wouldn't go in and shout at the judge. But just so we're absolutely clear on this, the courts have never been asked to rule on that question. The courts have never been asked. Because he hasn't allowed it to get to the point where that question can even be moot. The only questions that have been asked are, should he be allowed to continually trespass in a school? By the way, he's walking through corridors. He's not just showing up the gate. He's going in. He's walking through corridors. He's like the ghost, Banco's ghost at the funeral. Distracting the students, distracting the teachers. He's compelling the school to hire security, all because he will not obey the court order to stay away from the school. Now, here's the final thing. How can you have any moral authority to even take a case on the pronouns thing if you're not going to abide by the rulings of the court when they go against you? So, for argument's sake, let's say he did get in front of the judge, and the judge said, "Yeah, Enoch, you're entirely correct. I'm going to reinstate you now because that pronouns thing was bullshit." And imagine Wilson's Hospital School said, "Sorry, judge, he's not getting onto the property. We're going to continue the security, and we're not letting him back in." What do people would expect to happen then? And if your answer is that the state should impose on the school, Enoch Burke goes back to school, you can't have it both ways, where only one side of a case is obliged to follow the directions of the court if you agree with them. No, what he's doing is ridiculous. And too many people on the right, I think, are kind of going along with this kind of, but he's brave and he's right on the underlying issue. He's not even winning. He's not advancing the ball 5 yards up the pitch. All he's doing is making a show of himself, a show of his family, a show of the entire increasingly large majority of people who believe that he was actually right on the transgender issue. And he's ruining his own life in the process. He's racked up 255,000 euros worth of fines. He's paid 40 grand of that. They're now talking about taking his family's cars because those are being constantly used to transport him in breach of a court order. He's got 3 of his siblings, I think, are now being investigated for contempt of court because all they go in and they nod and say yes and they nod. It is utterly ridiculous. And for what cause? Like, this is, and then on top of that, he endorsed Heather Humphreys, the Fine Gael candidate, in the election. While the rest of us are supposed to say it's all about the pronouns. Give me a fucking break.
Why did he do that though?
Beats me. Name check the likes of me and you in that video, by the way. We were the baddies because we had both, I think, said publicly we were spoiling our votes.
Did we get name checked in that?
I did anyway. I don't know about you.
Oh, let's watch that back. Makes me feel famous.
Anyway, that's it. Look, I know what I've just said there will provoke strong reactions from some people because they see it as a case of goodies and baddies, right? Enoch Burke is the goodie, the school is the baddie, the courts are the baddie. But no, look, I'll say that one last thing.
Orders are court orders. You can't. What's the point in even? You can't just completely ignore court orders over and over again without any consequence. That's the way.
Yeah, there's another reason why I know that Enoch Burke is not in prison for his views on transgenderism. The reason I know that is that you share his views on transgenderism. I share broadly his views on transgenderism. Stella O'Malley shares his views on transgenderism. Laura, who does our other podcast, Ben, Jason, I think there are loads of people who share his views on transgenderism. None of them are in prison for their views. He's not in prison for his views. They're not rounding people up who have different opinions on this topic. He's in prison because the court gave him instructions and he refused to abide by them.
Well, look. I mean, what was the longest? Last year he was in prison for Christmas. Do you remember? I think he was in prison for a few hundred days of last year, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So it's shaping up to be something similar now again, is it?
Yeah. Well, this is the other thing, the human tragedy here as well. He's a very smart guy. He's a very smart young man. I'm going to say what I think is happening there, and she could sue me if she wants. I think that Martina Burke, the mother, is using her children as pawns. I think that the constant surrounding of them by this extreme agenda is ruining their lives individually. I think that he is a young man whose life is, at least his life in Ireland in terms of professional career is sort of over. He's now caught in this doom loop that he can't get out of. I mean, what does he think is going to happen? That the state is going to reinstate him, say you don't have to pay the fines, here's your 40 grand back, and you're the winner. And what mechanism does he think is going to bring that about? That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So he's in a doom loop where he's
yeah,
it doesn't end. It's all a very sad situation. That's what I think. Anyway, do you have anything else to add before we say goodbye to the peeps?
No. It was a very depressing note to end on. We should mention that it was a pretty good week in terms of Irish sport. I know you're obsessed with whatever those weird American sports you're always banging on about are.
Not right now.
But, and as you know, I'm more of a rugby fan. But, man, it was fun to see the toxic Irish male just go absolutely mental and celebrate. I mean, reminded me of, because I mean, I'm not being unfair when I say the Irish football team has had a habit of breaking hearts for many years, right? We're not often in tournaments, and I was in my house and I was watching it. My two boys were watching it in the living room with Keith, and then I went into the kitchen, and then I came back in, and then I walked back into the room and was standing in front of the TV about, I'd say, 15 seconds before that goal was scored. And I just got to see the boys. It was so fun, and it really was. It was cool. It was really cool. And normally the clock ticks down, and that's the end of that. And reminded me of, have you ever seen that movie True Romance with Patricia Arquette and Christian Slater? And she has this famous line in it where she says, "Usually that's the way it goes, but every once in a while it goes the other way too." And it reminded me of that. Like, usually the clock just ticks down, but on this one time, it was super cool.
No, it was a big moment. I did, despite myself, because I stopped watching Irish soccer. I just refused to watch it for years because I just thought, what's the point? And despite myself, I might have watched a bit of the Hungary game the other day. And no, it'd be great for the country if they can get past the Czech Republic and the Danes or whoever else they have to get past. But I'm still too scarred by years and years of pain and misery to get too excited just yet. I was very excited by the Scottish result against Denmark the other night. I thought that was very exciting to see, and I am, because I am disgraceful West Brit. I am absolutely buzzing for the Ashes series that kicks off in Australia at 2:00 in the morning on Friday. I think it's going to be an absolute humdinger. If you're a cricket fan, you'll have a great time. If you're not a cricket fan, I pity you. Anyway.
Why do you have all these weird nerd sports? What's the other one? The big, huge thing with the big shoulder pads. What's that thing you watch?
American football, the big, huge thing.
I don't care.
Yes, I support the New York Jets, which is a lifetime of misery and suffering. So people who are annoyed at me can always just look at the Jets results this year and know that I'm suffering. All right, look, we will leave it there. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for listening to Sarah. Thank you for being the great audience that you always are. I repeat, those of you who are coming to Back of Ideas tomorrow, come and say hello to me. Come and say hello to Sarah. We'd love to hear from you and meet you. And if not, we hope to see you at a future event. That's me. That's her. We'll see you next week. Take care.